Hello everyone. Welcome to Mr. Midnight True Crime Stories. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. There's a particular kind of fear that settles in when you realize the person standing closest to you might be the most dangerous one in the room. It's not the dramatic fear of horror movies or true crime documentaries that focus on strangers lurking in shadows. It's quieter than that, more insidious. It's the slow, creeping realization that the people we share our homes with, our meals with, our secrets with, might be hiding something far darker than we ever imagined. Most violent crimes don't begin with strangers. They don't start with broken windows or jimmied locks. They start with a familiar voice saying goodnight. A trusted hand preparing dinner. A respected professional writing a prescription. They start in places where we've learned to let our guard down, where suspicion feels like betrayal, where questioning someone's motive seems impossible because, after all, they're family. They're professionals. They love us. The emergency call came in at 2:17 in the morning. The dispatcher heard a young voice, trembling, fighting to stay calm. There were gunshots, the voice said. Loud ones. Coming from upstairs. Then silence. Then the sound of someone trying very hard not to cry. In another town, hundreds of miles away, a scientist sat in a police interrogation room, hands folded neatly on the table, explaining with clinical precision exactly how certain substances interact with the human cardiovascular system. In a third location, surveillance cameras captured the moment a celebration turned into chaos, the moment laughter became screaming, the moment a young woman who was simply enjoying Christmas Eve became a casualty of violence that had nothing to do with her. These crimes didn't happen in dark alleys. They happened in homes with family photos on the walls. They happened in hospitals where people go to heal. They happened in pubs decorated with tinsel and Christmas lights, where people gathered to celebrate. They happened in churches, in hotel rooms, in spaces we've been taught to think of as safe. And that's exactly why they were so devastating. Because the victims never saw them coming. Because trust, familiarity, and routine had lulled them into a false sense of security that made them vulnerable in ways a stranger never could. This is a story about betrayal. About how violence hides behind routine and expertise and authority. About how the systems designed to protect us sometimes fail so spectacularly that the consequences ripple outward, touching lives that should have been safe. This is about the crimes we never suspect until it's too late, committed by the people we never imagined capable of such darkness. The town of Redwood Valley sat nestled in the foothills of the North Cascade region, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names and left their doors unlocked. It was rural enough to feel peaceful, but developed enough to have all the modern conveniences. The Mercer family had lived there for nearly 15 years, in a sprawling ranch-style house at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by tall pines and the kind of quiet that city people find either peaceful or unsettling, depending on their disposition. Helen Mercer was 54, a former teacher who had retired early to focus on her pottery business. She sold her work at local craft fairs and had built a modest following of collectors who appreciated her distinctive glazing technique. She was known in town as warm but private, the kind of woman who would chat pleasantly at the farmer's market but didn't share much about her personal life. Her husband, David, 47, worked as a regional sales manager for an agricultural equipment company. He traveled frequently, sometimes gone for days at a time, visiting farms and distributors across 3 states. When he was home, neighbors would see him working in the large garage he'd converted into a workshop, building furniture as a hobby. They had one daughter. Lena was 16, quiet and artistic like her mother, though her medium was photography rather than clay. She attended Redwood Valley High School, made decent grades, and had a small circle of friends. To anyone looking from the outside, the Mercers seemed like a stable, unremarkable family. There were no dramatic fights that neighbors overheard, no police calls to the residence, no signs of the kind of dysfunction that people later claim they always suspected. The house itself reflected this normalcy. It was well maintained, painted a soft sage green with white trim. Helen's pottery studio occupied a converted sunroom at the back. David's workshop took up most of the 3-car garage. Lena's bedroom was upstairs, decorated with prints of Ansel Adams photographs, and her own work pinned to a corkboard. There was also a small guest cottage on the property, about 50 yards from the main house, originally built for Helen's mother who had passed away 3 years earlier. For the past year, it had been occupied by Marcus Webb, a family friend who had fallen on hard times after a divorce and job loss. David had offered him the cottage rent-free while he got back on his feet. On the morning of October 8th, Helen's sister, Christine, arrived at the house around 9:30 for what was supposed to be a casual visit. She and Helen had plans to drive into town together to pick up supplies for an upcoming craft fair. Christine had texted when she was 10 minutes away, as she always did, but received no response. This wasn't entirely unusual. Helen sometimes got absorbed in her work and forgot to check her phone. But when Christine arrived and found the front door locked, which was unusual for that time of morning, she felt the first small flutter of concern. She knocked. No answer. She walked around to the back, thinking Helen might be in her studio with music playing. The studio was empty, kiln cold. Christine tried calling. The phone rang inside the house, unanswered. She tried David's number. Straight to voicemail. Finally, she called Lena, who answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Aunt Christine? What's wrong? I'm at the house. Where are you?" "I'm here. In my room." "What? Can you come let me in? Your mom's not answering." There was a pause, then Lena said, "Okay, give me a second." Christine waited by the front door. When Lena opened it, she was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her long dark hair tangled from sleep. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed. Christine's concern deepened immediately. "Are you okay? Have you been crying?" Lena shook her head, but wouldn't meet her aunt's eyes. "I'm fine. Just tired." "Where are your parents?" "I don't know. I heard them earlier, but I haven't seen them." Christine stepped inside. The house was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. She walked toward the master bedroom, calling Helen's name. Lena followed slowly, staying several steps behind. The bedroom door was closed. Christine knocked, then opened it when there was no response. Helen and David Mercer were both in bed, lying on their backs, covers pulled up to their chests. For one disorienting second, Christine thought they were simply sleeping deeply, that she was about to wake them and feel foolish for her concern. Then she saw the blood. Dark stains on the pillowcases, on the headboard, spattered on the pale blue wall behind the bed. She saw the unnatural stillness of their bodies, the waxy quality of their skin. She screamed. She stumbled backward, colliding with Lena in the hallway. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial. She was saying words. She could hear herself, but they didn't sound like they were coming from her own mouth. "Dead. Both dead. Blood. Please hurry." Lena stood very still in the hallway, her face expressionless, watching her aunt fall apart. The first sheriff's deputies arrived within 8 minutes. Then the coroner. Then the state police, because Redwood Valley's small sheriff's department wasn't equipped to handle something like this. By noon, the Mercer house was swarming with investigators, photographers, forensic technicians. Yellow tape cordoned off the property. Neighbors gathered at the end of the gravel road, trying to see what was happening, exchanging speculation and shock. The initial assessment seemed straightforward, if tragic. Murder-suicide. It happened more often than people wanted to admit, especially in rural areas where access to mental health care was limited and the pressures of financial stress or relationship problems could build to a breaking point. Helen had been shot twice, once in the chest and once in the head. David had been shot once in the head, the weapon still loosely gripped in his right hand. A 9mm handgun, registered to David, purchased legally 3 years earlier for home protection. But almost immediately, things didn't add up. The lead investigator, Detective Sarah Reeves from the state police, noticed the blood first. There was too much of it in the bathroom. The master bathroom showed signs of cleanup attempts. Diluted blood in the sink. Blood traces in the grout between the floor tiles that someone had tried to scrub away. Bloody towels stuffed in the bottom of the laundry hamper, covered with clean clothes. If this was a murder-suicide that happened in bed, why was there evidence of significant bleeding in the bathroom? Then there were the firearms. David owned 3 guns. The 9mm found in his hand, a hunting rifle kept in a locked cabinet in his workshop, and a small .22 caliber pistol that Helen kept in her nightstand for personal protection. Ballistics would take time, but preliminary examination suggested the bullets retrieved from the victims didn't match the 9mm. They matched the .22, which meant the gun in David's hand wasn't the murder weapon. Someone had staged the scene. Detective Reeves methodically worked through the house, documenting everything. She noticed immediately that there was no forced entry anywhere. No broken windows, no damaged locks, no signs of a struggle anywhere except the master bedroom and bathroom. Whoever did this either had a key or had been let inside willingly. The list of people with access to the house was short. Lena, Marcus Webb in the guest cottage, Helen's sister Christine, who had discovered the bodies, a housekeeper who came every other Wednesday and had been there 2 days before the murders. Lena sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild October temperature, answering questions in a flat, monotone voice. Yes, she had been home all night. No, she hadn't heard anything unusual. Well, maybe. Around midnight, she thought she might have heard her parents arguing, but she had her headphones on, so she wasn't sure. She'd fallen asleep around 1. When did she wake up? When her aunt called. Had she gone into her parents' room this morning? No. She'd heard them moving around earlier, maybe around 7, but she'd stayed in her room. Why? Because she'd been up late finishing homework and wanted to sleep in. Detective Reeves watched Lena carefully as she spoke. The girl's effect was wrong. Not hysterical, not sobbing, not even visibly shaken. Just blank. People responded to trauma in different ways. Reeves knew that. Shock could manifest as numbness. But there was something else, something in the way Lena's eyes kept drifting toward the hallway that led to the master bedroom, then quickly away. Something in the way her hands, hidden under the blanket, seemed to be trembling even though her voice remained steady. Lena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you been in your parents' room at all today? No. Are you sure? A pause. Then, yes. I'm sure. Detective Reeves made a note. Then she asked the question she'd been building toward. Lena, where's your mother's gun? The small pistol she kept in her nightstand? The change in Lena's expression was subtle but unmistakable. Her eyes widened slightly, her jaw tensed. I don't know. I guess it's still there. It's not. We've searched the bedroom. It's missing. Maybe my dad moved it. Maybe. We'll keep looking. Detective Reeves paused, then added, We're going to need to search your room, Lena. Just routine. Is that okay? Do I have a choice? You do. But if you have nothing to hide, it would help us eliminate you as a suspect and focus on finding who actually did this. Lena stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Fine. Whatever. The forensic team started with Lena's bedroom just before 3 in the afternoon. At first, everything seemed normal. Typical teenager's room. Unmade bed, clothes draped over a chair, laptop on the desk surrounded by textbooks, and empty energy drink cans. Photography equipment in one corner, a nice camera and several lenses. Posters on the walls. Nothing suspicious. Then they moved the bed to search underneath it. One of the technicians noticed something odd about the carpet near the headboard. A slightly darker patch, barely visible. He called over Detective Reeves. They pulled the bed completely away from the wall. The carpet showed clear signs of recent cleaning, an area roughly 2 feet in diameter that had been scrubbed much more recently than the rest of the room. The technician sprayed luminol. Under the UV light, the area lit up bright blue. Blood, a significant amount of it, despite the cleanup attempts. They kept searching. Inside a storage ottoman at the foot of Lena's bed, beneath winter sweaters and old yearbooks, they found a plastic garbage bag. Inside the bag were a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, and a hoodie, all heavily stained with blood. A pair of sneakers, also bloody. And at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in a pillowcase, was Helen Mercer's .22 caliber pistol. Detective Reeves stood in the doorway of Lena's room, processing what they'd found. The girl was still downstairs with a victim's advocate who had arrived to provide support. Reeves thought about Lena's flat effect, her careful answers, the way she'd hesitated before agreeing to the room search. She thought about the clean blood in the master bathroom, then the hidden blood in Lena's bedroom. She thought about the missing hours in Lena's timeline. She'd said she heard her parents around 7 in the morning, but the medical examiner's preliminary assessment suggested they'd been dead for at least 6 hours before the bodies were discovered, which meant they'd been killed sometime between midnight and 3 in the morning. Reeves went back downstairs. Lena looked up when the detective entered the living room, and for the first time, there was real fear in her eyes. Lena Mercer, I need you to stand up, please. The girl stood slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. You're under arrest for the murders of Helen and David Mercer. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Lena didn't protest, didn't cry out or claim innocence. She simply held out her wrists for the handcuffs, her face as blank as it had been all day. The victim's advocate looked stunned, starting to protest that this was a traumatized child who needed support, not accusation. But Detective Reeves had seen too much in that bedroom. Too much blood, too much evidence, too much careful concealment. The interrogation began that evening, after Lena had been processed and a lawyer had been appointed to represent her. Lena waived her right to have her attorney present for the initial questioning, which surprised everyone. She sat across from Detective Reeves in the small interrogation room, her hands folded on the table, and waited. "Tell me what happened last night, Lena. The truth this time." For a long moment, Lena said nothing. Then, quietly, "They were going to send me away." "Send you where?" "To a wilderness therapy program. One of those places for troubled teens. They'd already made the arrangements. I was supposed to leave next week." "Why did they think you needed wilderness therapy?" Lena's jaw tightened. "Because I got caught smoking weed at school. Because my grades dropped. Because they found out I was dating someone they didn't approve of. They said I was becoming uncontrollable. That I needed discipline and structure." She laughed, a bitter sound. "My mom made pottery and my dad was gone half the time, but I was the one who needed discipline. So you killed them." "I didn't mean to kill both of them. Just my dad. He was the one pushing for the program. My mom was on the fence. I thought I could convince her. But she woke up when I shot him. She saw me standing there with the gun. She started screaming." Lena's voice remained eerily calm, recounting the events like she was describing a movie she'd watched, not a double murder she'd committed. "I panicked. I shot her too. I didn't plan it. It just happened. Walk me through it. Step by step." Lena took a breath. "I went to their room around 1 in the morning. I knew they'd be asleep. I took my mom's gun from her nightstand. It was right there. She always kept it loaded. I stood next to my dad's side of the bed for like 5 minutes, just trying to work up the nerve. I kept thinking about that program. Months in the wilderness with strangers, being treated like a criminal. For smoking weed. It seemed so unfair." "So you shot him?" "Yeah, twice. Once in the chest, once in the head. The first shot didn't kill him right away. He made this sound, like he was trying to say something. That's when my mom woke up. She sat up and saw me. Saw the gun. She said my name, like she couldn't believe it. Like she was asking me a question. And I shot her. I didn't think about it. I just pulled the trigger." Detective Reeves felt a chill run through her. The matter-of-fact delivery, the lack of remorse, the way Lena described murdering her own parents with less emotion than most people use to describe traffic delays. "What happened after that?" "There was so much blood. It got on me on the floor. I dragged my dad into the bathroom to try to clean up, but he was too heavy. I got some of the blood in there, but most of it was in the bedroom. I tried to make it look like a murder-suicide. I put my dad's gun in his hand, wiped down my mom's gun. But I didn't know what to do with my clothes. They were covered in blood. So I hid them in my room and cleaned the carpet where I'd been standing. Then I took a shower and went to bed." "You went to bed?" "Yeah. I was exhausted. It was almost 4 in the morning by then." "Lena, do you understand the severity of what you've done?" For the first time, something flickered across Lena's face. Not quite emotion, but an awareness that she should probably be feeling something. "I know it's bad. I know I'll go to prison. But at least I won't have to go to that program." The confession was detailed, consistent with the physical evidence, and absolutely chilling in its lack of remorse. Lena Mercer was charged as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial became national news. One of those cases that sparked endless debate about teenage psychology, parenting, and the justice system's treatment of minors who commit heinous crimes. Lena's defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, claiming that the pressure of being sent away had triggered a psychotic break. But the prosecution presented her confession, her methodical cleanup attempts, her calculated effort to stage the scene. This wasn't a moment of temporary insanity. This was premeditated murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on both counts. Lena Mercer was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no reaction when the verdict was read. In the courtroom, Helen's sister Christine wept, grieving not just for her sister and brother-in-law, but for the niece she'd thought she knew, who turned out to be someone else entirely. The Mercer case became a grim example of how violence can hide inside the most ordinary families, how resentment can build behind closed doors, how a teenager could decide that murder was preferable to inconvenience and execute that decision with chilling efficiency. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how easily Lena had hidden her capacity for violence right up until the moment she chose to act on it. Her teachers described her as quiet but pleasant. Her friends said she seemed normal, maybe a little stressed about school, but nothing alarming. Even her parents, in the months before their deaths, had described her to relatives as going through typical teenage rebellion, nothing they couldn't handle. The house in Redwood Valley sat empty for 2 years before Helen's sister finally sold it. It went for significantly below market value. Some stains, after all, can't be cleaned away. But the Mercer case, as shocking as it was, represented only one type of betrayal, one form of violence hiding in plain sight. Because while Lena Mercer used brute force and bullets, there are other ways to kill someone. Quieter ways, more sophisticated ways, ways that require knowledge and access and a kind of cold calculation that most people simply aren't capable of. Dr. Natalie Voss understood chemistry the way most people understand breathing. It was intuitive to her, elegant, a language of reactions and bonds and transformations that made perfect sense. She'd completed her PhD in toxicology at 32, her dissertation focusing on the mechanisms of synthetic opioid overdose. She'd published extensively, spoken at conferences, consulted with law enforcement on overdose cases. She worked at the Morro Bay Research Institute, a prestigious facility on the Pacific Coast that specialized in pharmaceutical development and drug interaction studies. She was brilliant. Everyone who worked with her said so. Brilliant, dedicated, meticulous. She had clearance to access substances that most people didn't even know existed, compounds so potent that a few micrograms could be fatal. Her work required precision and caution. One mistake in the lab could have catastrophic consequences. She never made mistakes. Ethan Cole was a software developer, 41, freelance. He'd moved to Morro Bay 3 years earlier, drawn by the coastal beauty and the growing tech scene. He lived in a small house near the marina, spent his free time sailing and hiking. He met Natalie at a fundraiser for the Research Institute. She'd been there representing her department. He'd been there because his sister worked in administration. They'd started talking about the ocean, about sailing, about the strange beauty of the Pacific Northwest. He'd asked for her number. She'd given it to him. They dated for 8 months. By all accounts, it was a healthy relationship. They were both independent, both passionate about their work, both content with the arrangement. Ethan's friends described Natalie as smart and funny, maybe a little intense, but in a good way. Natalie's colleagues said Ethan seemed like a stabilizing presence for her, someone who made her laugh after long days in the lab. Then Ethan started pulling away. It was subtle at first, taking longer to respond to texts, being less available for weekend plans. Natalie noticed, of course she noticed, but she didn't push. She understood that relationships had rhythms, that sometimes people needed space. But when Ethan finally asked to talk, sitting across from her at their favorite coffee shop on a rainy November afternoon, she knew what was coming. "I don't think this is working," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Why not? I'm not sure we want the same things. Long term, I mean." "What things?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I want kids eventually. A family. You've made it clear that's not something you're interested in." This was true. Natalie had been direct about her lack of interest in motherhood from their first few dates. She liked her life the way it was. Her work was demanding and fulfilling. She didn't see how children fit into that picture. Ethan had seemed fine with it at the time. "You said you were okay with that," Natalie said quietly. "I thought I was. But I've been thinking about the future, and I realize I'm not. I'm sorry. I care about you, but I don't think we should keep dating if we want fundamentally different things." It was a reasonable conversation, a mature breakup. They finished their coffee, agreed to stay friends, went their separate ways. Natalie was disappointed, but not devastated. She threw herself into her work, pulled extra hours in the lab, focused on a new research project. She was fine. She told herself she was fine. But over the next 2 months, something shifted. Ethan started dating someone new, a woman named Claire who worked as an elementary school teacher. Natalie saw photos on social media. Ethan and Claire at the beach. Ethan and Claire at a Christmas party. Ethan and Claire looking happy in a way that Ethan and Natalie had never quite managed. And the thing that gnawed at Natalie, the thing she couldn't shake, was the unfairness of it. She'd been honest about who she was and what she wanted. Ethan had claimed to accept it, then changed his mind. And now he got to move on, to find someone who fit his vision of the future, while Natalie was left feeling like her life choices had been judged and found wanting. The anger built slowly. She didn't recognize it at first. She thought it was just sadness, just the normal ache of a relationship ending. But it darkened over time, curdled into something more bitter. She started imagining conversations where she told Ethan exactly what she thought of his cowardice, his inability to know his own mind, his willingness to waste 8 months of her life on a relationship he knew wouldn't work. She imagined him regretting leaving her. She imagined him suffering the way she felt like she was suffering. And then, one evening in her lab, handling a vial of carfentanil for a research protocol, she imagined something else. It was just a thought at first. Intrusive, shocking. The kind of dark impulse that flickers through most people's minds at some point and is immediately dismissed. But Natalie didn't dismiss it. She let it sit. She turned it over in her mind, examining it from different angles the way she examined chemical structures. She thought about how easy it would be, how completely untraceable, if done correctly, how satisfying it would be to take control of the situation, to be the one making decisions about the future instead of having decisions made for her. She told herself she wouldn't actually do it. It was just a fantasy, a way of processing her anger. But she started planning anyway, just hypothetically, just to see if it was even possible. She mapped out the steps in her mind with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to her research. Access the compound, calculate the dosage, find a delivery method, avoid detection, cover her tracks. The opportunity came in February. Ethan reached out, asking if she wanted to get coffee and catch up. He missed their friendship, he said. He hoped there were no hard feelings. Natalie suggested meeting at his place instead. More private, she said. They could really talk. Ethan agreed. She brought wine. A nice bottle, expensive. She'd injected it with a carefully calculated dose of carfentanil using a syringe so fine it left almost no mark. The substance was colorless, odorless, tasteless. Ethan would never know. She'd poured them each a glass, made sure he got the tainted one, and watched him drink it while they talked about nothing important. How his work was going. How her work was going. Whether he'd been sailing lately. All meaningless small talk while she waited for the compound to take effect. It happened faster than she'd expected. Ethan mid-sentence, his words starting to slur. Confusion crossing his face as his body stopped responding the way it should. He tried to stand, stumbled, fell. His breathing became shallow, labored. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the moment of understanding. The moment he realized this wasn't an accident, wasn't natural. The moment he knew what she'd done. She watched him die. It took less than 3 minutes. Respiratory failure, cardiac arrest. Clean, clinical, efficient. When it was over, she carefully cleaned up. Took the wine bottle with her. Wiped down surfaces she'd touched. Left no trace of her presence except the scheduled meeting in Ethan's calendar, which would make sense. 2 ex-partners having coffee. Nothing suspicious about that. She staged the scene to look like a suicide. Ethan had been depressed, she would say if anyone asked. The breakup had been hard on him. She'd been trying to be a supportive friend. It was tragic, but these things happened. She left a note she'd forged in his handwriting. Something vague about struggling to find meaning, about feeling lost. Not too specific, just enough to provide a narrative. Ethan's body was discovered the next morning when Claire came by for their planned brunch date. She found him collapsed on the living room floor, cold and unresponsive. The police were called. The scene was photographed. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office. Initial assessment suggested suicide by overdose, consistent with the staged narrative. Tragic, but not suspicious. But the medical examiner, Dr. Yolanda Chun, was thorough. She noticed something odd during the autopsy. The injection site on Ethan's arm, hidden under his sleeve, was unusual. It was too precise, too clean. People who self-inject, especially in a suicide attempt, often leave Messier marks. Multiple attempts. Bruising. This looked professional. She ordered a comprehensive toxicology panel, including tests for substances that weren't typically part of standard screening. The results came back 2 weeks later. Carfentanil. A A synthetic opioid 10,000 times more potent than morphine. Not a substance that someone could casually obtain. Not a substance that would be in Ethan's possession for any legitimate reason. Dr. Chin immediately flagged it as suspicious and contacted the police. Detective Marcus Lin took over the case. He started by interviewing everyone close to Ethan. Claire, his girlfriend, was devastated but cooperative. She said Ethan had seemed happy, excited about the future. He'd been talking about proposing, about starting a family. Suicide made no sense. She'd thought the note was strange, not like something Ethan would write. The handwriting looked right, but the content felt off. Detective Lin spoke with Ethan's friends, his co-workers, his family. Everyone said the same thing. Ethan hadn't been depressed. He'd been thriving. The suicide narrative didn't fit, which meant someone had killed him and staged the scene. The list of people with access to carfentanil was very short. It was a controlled substance, heavily regulated, tracked meticulously. Lin started checking with pharmaceutical companies, research facilities, hospitals. He found that the Morro Bay Research Institute had carfentanil in their inventory for toxicology research. He requested a list of everyone with clearance to access it. Dr. Natalie Voss's name was on that list. And when Detective Lin cross-referenced it with Ethan's known associates, he found the connection. Ex-girlfriend. Toxicologist. Access to the exact substance found in the victim's system. He brought her in for questioning. Natalie was calm during the interview, almost friendly. Yes, she and Ethan had dated. Yes, they'd broken up, but it was amicable. Yes, she had access to carfentanil for her research. No, she would never use it inappropriately. She understood the seriousness of the situation and was happy to cooperate. She provided an alibi for the night of Ethan's death. She'd been at home, alone, working on research notes. Could anyone verify that? Well, no, but that didn't mean she'd been out murdering her ex-boyfriend. She seemed almost amused by the suggestion. Detective Lin knew he needed more than access and opportunity. He needed evidence. He got a warrant to search Natalie's home and workplace. In her home office, tucked in a drawer beneath old tax documents, he found Ethan's calendar, torn out for the month of February. The entry for their meeting circled. Why would Natalie have this? She claimed she didn't know, that someone must have planted it. But the calendar had her fingerprints on it, and forensic analysis suggested it had been in her drawer for several weeks. In her car, which she'd insisted hadn't been driven the night of Ethan's death, they found trace evidence. A single fiber from Ethan's couch. Pollen from plants that grew only in Ethan's neighborhood. Small things, easily missed, but impossible to explain if she'd truly stayed home that night. Most damning was the discovery at the Research Institute. Inventory logs showed that a small amount of carfentanil had gone missing 3 days before Ethan's death. Not enough to trigger automatic alerts, but enough to kill someone. Natalie had been the last person to access that storage cabinet. The case built slowly, piece by piece. Natalie's calm facade started to crack during the second interview. She became defensive, angry. How dare they accuse her based on circumstantial evidence? She was a respected scientist. She saved lives with her research. The idea that she would use her knowledge to kill someone was insulting. But Detective Lin kept pushing. He asked about the breakup, about how she'd felt when Ethan started dating Claire. Natalie's face twisted with anger she could no longer hide. He was a coward, she said. He wasted my time. 8 months of my life on someone who didn't have the backbone to be honest about what he wanted. She caught herself, realizing what she'd revealed, and tried to walk it back. But the mask had slipped. The jury would later hear that recording, would see the rage beneath the professional veneer. The physical evidence was circumstantial, but combined with motive and means, it painted a clear picture. Natalie Voss had murdered Ethan Cole, using her expertise to commit what she thought would be the perfect crime. She'd calculated the dosage, planned the delivery, staged the scene. She'd been meticulous in every way except one. She'd underestimated the medical examiner's thoroughness and the detective's persistence. At trial, the prosecution presented her as a calculated killer who had used her professional knowledge as a weapon. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was purely circumstantial, that having access to a substance didn't mean you used it to kill someone. But the jury saw through it. They saw a woman scorned who had decided that if she couldn't have the future she wanted with Ethan, he wouldn't have a future at all. Guilty. First-degree murder. Life in prison. Natalie Voss, who had spent her career studying how poisons killed, would spend the rest of her life behind bars for using that knowledge to take a life. The case highlighted something deeply unsettling. Intelligence, education, professional success, none of these things precluded someone from committing murder. In fact, they could make someone more dangerous. Natalie had known exactly how to kill efficiently and how to avoid detection. She'd made only the smallest mistakes, and without the medical examiner's diligence, she might have gotten away with it. The case became a cautionary tale in forensic science circles. Trust but verify. Never assume suicide without thorough investigation. Never underestimate what a motivated killer with specialized knowledge can do. But while Natalie Voss used sophistication and planning, and Lena Mercer used impulsive violence born of resentment, there are crimes that fall somewhere in between. Crimes that erupt suddenly in public spaces, crimes that don't discriminate between targets and bystanders, crimes that shatter any illusion of safety we might cling to when we leave our homes. Christmas Eve in Northport was always festive. The industrial city on the northern coast of Albion transformed itself each December, stringing lights across the old brick buildings downtown, setting up an ice skating rink in the central square, hosting a Christmas market that drew people from surrounding towns. Despite its reputation as a rough working-class city with higher-than-average crime rates, Northport took pride in its holiday traditions. For a few weeks each year, the community came together to celebrate. The Crimson Rose was a pub in the east end of Northport, a neighborhood that had seen better days but was slowly gentrifying. Young professionals were moving in, fixing up the old row houses, opening small businesses. The pub had been there for 40 years, a local institution known for its fish and chips and its Christmas Eve party. Every year, they'd decorate with tinsel and lights, serve mulled wine and mince pies, and create a warm gathering place for locals who didn't have family celebrations to attend or who wanted to extend the festivities beyond their homes. Rhea Collins was 26, a nurse at Northport General Hospital. She'd moved to the city 2 years earlier after completing her training, drawn by the affordable housing and the opportunity to work in a busy urban hospital where she could gain experience quickly. She was dedicated to her job, often working double shifts during the holidays so that colleagues with young children could spend time with their families. This Christmas Eve, she'd finished her shift at 6 in the evening and met up with 3 friends from nursing school at the Crimson Rose. The pub was packed, warm with body heat and conversation. Rhea and her friends found a table near the back, ordered drinks, and settled in to decompress after a long week. They talked about work, about holiday plans, about nothing particularly important. Just 4 young women enjoying each other's company, celebrating making it through another year in a demanding profession. Around 10:30, a group of men entered the pub. 8 of them, ranging in age from late teens to early 30s. They were loud, already drunk, wearing matching jackets that identified them as members of the Northport Kings, a local gang with territory in the East End. The pub's atmosphere shifted immediately. Regulars recognized the colors, the swagger, the potential for trouble. Some people paid their bills and left. Others moved to tables farther from the group. The bartender, an older man named Frank who'd worked there for 15 years, considered asking them to leave, but decided against it. It was Christmas Eve. Maybe they'd just have a few drinks and move on. For 20 minutes, it seemed like that might happen. The Kings ordered beer, played pool, kept mostly to themselves. Then another group arrived. 5 men, younger, wearing different colors. The Albion Crew, a rival gang with territory just south of the East End. There'd been tension between the groups for months, disputes over drug distribution and respect, and all the petty reasons that young men found to hate each other. Frank saw them enter and immediately moved toward the door, intending to intercept them, to defuse the situation before it escalated. He was too late. Someone from the Kings said something to someone from the Albion Crew. An insult, a challenge, something that demanded a response. Voices rose. People started standing up. The posturing began, that dangerous dance of egos that could still be walked back with the right intervention or could explode into violence with the wrong word. It exploded. Someone threw the first punch. Within seconds, both groups were fighting, a chaotic brawl of fists and bottles and furniture being knocked over. Other patrons scrambled to get out of the way, pressing against walls, ducking behind the bar. Frank was yelling for everyone to stop, his voice lost in the noise. Rhea and her friends tried to move toward the exit, caught in the crush of people trying to escape. Then someone pulled a gun. Marcus Hale, 19, member of the Northport Kings, with a record that included assault, theft, and weapons charges. He'd been released from juvenile detention just 3 months earlier. He pulled a 9mm from his waistband, pointed it at the Albion crew members, and started firing. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. People screamed, dropped to the floor, tried to make themselves smaller. Hale fired wildly, no aim, no precision, just spraying bullets into the crowd. One hit a member of the Albion crew in the shoulder. Another shattered a mirror behind the bar. A third went wide and hit the wall. The fourth bullet hit Rhea Collins in the chest. She went down instantly, her friends screaming her name. The pub erupted into complete chaos. The Albion crew scattered, running for the doors. The Northport Kings followed, including Marcus Hale, who shoved his gun back into his waistband and disappeared into the night. In less than 30 seconds, the pub went from a brawl to a crime scene. Rhea's friends tried to help her. One of them, also a nurse, applied pressure to the wound, screaming for someone to call an ambulance. But Rhea was bleeding out fast, the bullet having nicked her pulmonary artery. She was unconscious within minutes. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the 911 call, but by then it was too late. Rhea Collins died on the floor of the Crimson Rose pub, surrounded by tinsel and Christmas decorations, her blood mixing with spilled beer and broken glass. She'd been 26 years old. She'd dedicated her life to saving others. She'd been celebrating Christmas Eve with friends, doing nothing wrong, threatening no one. And she died because 2 groups of young men couldn't put aside their grievances for one night. Because Marcus Hale had brought a gun to a bar and fired it without thinking about where the bullets would go. Because violence, once unleashed, doesn't discriminate between targets and bystanders. The manhunt for Marcus Hale began immediately. Security cameras outside the pub had captured him fleeing the scene. Witnesses identified him. His gang affiliations were well known to police. They raided known Northport Kings locations, questioned associates, put pressure on anyone who might know where he was hiding. For 3 days, Hale evaded capture. Then someone, whether out of conscience or self-interest, gave him up. Police found him hiding in a basement apartment on the south side of the city. He was arrested without incident. During questioning, he showed no remorse. Rhea's death was an accident, he said. He'd been defending himself. The Albion crew had started the fight. He'd pulled his gun to protect his friends. How was he supposed to know some random girl would get in the way? That was on her for not getting down fast enough. It wasn't his fault. The detectives listening to him felt a particular kind of disgust. This wasn't even sophisticated denial. It was complete moral bankruptcy. Marcus Hale genuinely believed he bore no responsibility for killing an innocent woman. In his worldview, pulling a gun in a crowded pub and firing indiscriminately was justified self-defense, and anyone who got hurt was simply collateral damage. The investigation revealed that Hale's gun had been stolen in a residential burglary 2 months earlier. He'd obtained it through a series of intermediaries, none of whom had bothered to ask why a 19-year-old with a criminal record wanted an illegal firearm. The system had failed at multiple points. Hale had been released from juvenile detention despite recommendations from his case worker that he remain in custody. He'd skipped mandatory check-ins with his parole officer without consequence. He'd been hanging around known gang members in violation of his release conditions, and no one had intervened. Rhea Collins would still be alive if any one of those failures had been corrected. But they hadn't been, and now a promising young nurse was dead, and her family was left to grieve a loss that should never have happened. The trial was mercifully quick. Marcus Hale was charged with second-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, illegal weapons possession, and reckless endangerment. The evidence was overwhelming. The witnesses were consistent. Even Hale's own confession, stripped of his self-serving justifications, amounted to an admission that he'd brought a gun to a fight and used it without regard for who might get hurt. The jury convicted him on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in prison, calling him a danger to society who had shown no capacity for remorse or rehabilitation. Hale showed no emotion as the sentence was read. In the gallery, Rhea's parents held each other and wept. The case became a rallying point for anti-gang initiatives in Northport, for calls to reform the juvenile justice system, for demands that parole violations be taken seriously before they resulted in tragedies. Ria's hospital colleagues established a scholarship in her name for nursing students. Her friends spoke at community events about the ripple effects of gun violence, about how one moment of reckless brutality had destroyed not just Ria's life, but the lives of everyone who loved her. The Crimson Rose pub never fully recovered. Frank tried to reopen after the crime scene was cleared, but the memories were too fresh. Regulars stayed away. New customers found the atmosphere too heavy. Eventually, Frank sold the business. The new owners gutted the interior, changed the name, tried to create something new that wasn't haunted by what had happened there. But people in the neighborhood still called it the place where that nurse died, and the Christmas decorations that went up each year seemed like a memorial rather than a celebration. Ria Collins' story is different from Lena Mercer's or Natalie Voss's, but it connects to the same theme. Violence hiding in places we think should be safe. Violence enabled by systems that fail to protect. Violence committed by people who should have been stopped long before they had the opportunity to kill. Marcus Hale wasn't family. He wasn't a trusted professional. He was exactly what everyone feared, a violent criminal with access to a gun. But the system had known about him, had documented his risks, had released him anyway. And that failure cost Ria her life. Now, if you're enjoying this deep dive into cases that reveal the hidden nature of violence, make sure you hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. These patterns need to be recognized. And your support helps this channel continue bringing you thoroughly researched true crime content. Drop a comment below about which case has affected you most so far. But the violence we've discussed so far, as brutal and tragic as it has been, still exists within frameworks we can understand. A resentful teenager, a vengeful ex-partner, a gang member with a gun. These are narratives that, while disturbing, fit into categories our minds can process. What becomes truly frightening is when violence wraps itself in respectability, when abuse hides behind community standing and moral authority, when entire families conspire to control and ultimately destroy one of their own. Fairfield Hollow was the kind of small Midwestern town that appeared on postcards and in nostalgia-driven television commercials. Population 3,000. Main street with local businesses. Churches on every other corner. High school football games that the whole town attended. It was a place where people knew their neighbors, where doors were left unlocked, where the worst crimes were usually teenagers toilet papering yards or stealing beer from the convenience store. The Hollow family was well known in town. Aaron Hollow ran a successful insurance agency. His father, Paul, was a retired pastor who still preached occasionally at Fairfield Community Church. Aaron's mother, Miriam, taught Sunday school and organized the church's charitable outreach programs. They were pillars of the community, the kind of family that people pointed to as an example of what strong values and faith could create. Aaron had married Claire Donovan when they were both 23, a union celebrated by the entire community. Claire was the daughter of the town's only doctor, herself educated and cultured, with a degree in education from a state university. She'd taught elementary school for 2 years before becoming pregnant with their first child. She'd left teaching to be a stay-at-home mother, which everyone agreed was the right choice. Aaron and Claire had 3 children, Emma, 7, Lucas, 5, and Grace, 3. From the outside, they appeared to have a perfect life. Beautiful family, successful business, active in church and community. But inside the Hollow household, a different reality existed. Aaron was controlling in ways that started small and escalated over the years. He monitored Claire's spending, requiring her to ask permission for purchases beyond groceries. He checked her phone regularly, questioning any contact with friends or family he deemed inappropriate. He made decisions about the children's education, healthcare, and activities without consulting her, dismissing her opinions as emotional or uninformed. Claire's family noticed the changes in her. She became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped joining them for weekly dinners, always having some excuse about Aaron's schedule or the children being tired. When they did see her, she seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone, cutting visits short if Aaron called. Her mother asked if everything was okay. Claire always said yes, but the smile never reached her eyes. The situation worsened after Claire expressed interest in going back to work. The youngest child was in preschool now, Claire reasoned. She could teach part-time, contribute to the household income, use her education. Aaron's response was swift and harsh. Absolutely not. His wife's place was in the home with their children. Working would be neglecting her responsibilities. What would people at church think? What kind of message would it send to their daughters? Claire pushed back, gently at first, then more firmly. She wanted some independence, some identity beyond wife and mother. She loved her children, but she'd also worked hard for her degree and wanted to use it. The arguments escalated. Aaron would raise his voice, slam doors, give Claire the silent treatment for days. When that didn't work, he enlisted his parents. Paul and Miriam sat Claire down for what they called a counseling session, explaining that a wife's role was to submit to her husband's leadership, that Claire's desire for independence was prideful and destructive to her marriage. They quoted scripture, talked about the importance of family unity, suggested that Claire was being influenced by secular feminist ideas that contradicted God's design for marriage. Claire felt trapped. Her own family lived an hour away, and their relationship had become strained by Aaron's isolating behavior. Her friends from before marriage had drifted away. Their invitations to get together repeatedly declined because Aaron didn't approve, or because Claire was too exhausted from walking on eggshells at home. The church community she'd once found supportive now felt like another arm of Aaron's control, with the pastor reinforcing traditional gender roles and the women's group subtly judging her perceived dissatisfaction with her blessings. In September, Claire made a decision. She was going to leave. She'd contacted a women's shelter in a neighboring city, had been working with an advocate to develop a safety plan. She'd opened a bank account Aaron didn't know about, slowly saving small amounts from grocery money. She'd copied important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, and hidden them at her mother's house. She was going to wait until Aaron was away on a business trip, pack the children into her car, and drive to the shelter. From there, she'd file for divorce and work on building a new life. She confided in one person about her plan, her sister, Beth, who lived 2 hours away. Beth was supportive, offering to help however she could. She gave Claire a prepaid phone so she could communicate without Aaron tracking her calls. She promised to be available whenever Claire was ready to leave. The plan was set for the first week of October, when Aaron would be at an insurance conference in Chicago. But Beth made a mistake. She mentioned Claire's plans to their mother during a phone call, assuming their mother would be relieved that Claire was finally escaping an unhealthy situation. Their mother, however, had a different reaction. She was horrified at the idea of divorce, worried about the scandal, concerned about what it would do to the children to be torn from their father. She called Aaron. Aaron was at work when he got the call. He thanked his mother-in-law for the information, his voice calm and controlled. Then he called his father. Paul Hollow arrived at Aaron's office within 30 minutes. They talked for over an hour, developing what they called an intervention plan. Claire was clearly having some kind of breakdown, they decided. She needed help, guidance, spiritual counseling. They needed to act quickly before she did something drastic that would destroy the family. That evening, when Claire returned from taking the children to soccer practice, she found Aaron, Paul, and Miriam waiting in the living room. The children were sent upstairs to play. Claire was told to sit down. They needed to talk. Aaron started. He knew about her plans to leave. He knew about the secret bank account, the documents at her mother's house, the contact with the women's shelter. He was disappointed and hurt that instead of working on their marriage, Claire had chosen to sneak around behind his back. But he was willing to forgive if she agreed to get help. Claire felt her heart racing, her carefully constructed escape plan collapsing. She tried to explain that she wasn't having a breakdown, that she was making a rational decision to leave a controlling relationship. Aaron cut her off. See, this was exactly the problem. Claire had convinced herself that normal marital structure was abuse. She'd been poisoned by secular psychology and needed to return to biblical principles. Paul and Miriam joined in. They loved Claire like a daughter, they said. They wanted to help. But she needed to recognize that her behavior was destructive. She was being selfish, putting her own desires above her family's well-being. They suggested she take some time away to think and pray, to get her priorities straight. They'd arranged for her to stay at a church retreat center in the countryside for a few weeks. It was quiet, peaceful. She'd have time to reflect without the distractions of daily life. Claire realized with growing horror that this wasn't a conversation. It was a trap. She stood up, said she wasn't going anywhere, that she was going to take her children and leave. Aaron grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Sit down," he said. "We're not done talking." She pulled away, started toward the stairs to get her children. Paul blocked her path. He was a large man, even in his 60s, imposing. He put his hand on her shoulder and pushed her back toward the couch. Claire stumbled, caught herself. The fear she'd been managing to control burst into panic. She screamed for her children. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her small face confused and frightened. Miriam went upstairs to comfort the children, taking them to the playroom and closing the door. Claire could hear Emma crying, asking what was wrong with Mommy. Miriam's soothing voice explaining that Mommy was just upset, that everything would be fine. Downstairs, Aaron and Paul presented Claire with an ultimatum. She could go to the retreat center voluntarily, or they would have her committed for psychiatric evaluation. Aaron had already spoken with a doctor, a friend from church, who was willing to sign the paperwork stating that Claire was a danger to herself. Either way, she was going somewhere to get help. Claire looked at the two men, her husband and her father-in-law, and saw no compassion in their faces. Only determination. Only the absolute certainty that they were right and she was wrong. She thought about her children upstairs. She thought about fighting back and losing them entirely if Aaron went through with the psychiatric commitment. At least if she agreed to go to the retreat center, she might be able to contact help, might be able to figure out another escape plan. She agreed to go. Aaron relaxed, smiled, said he was glad she was making the right choice. Paul patted her shoulder approvingly. Miriam came downstairs and hugged her, said this would be good for her, that she'd come back refreshed and ready to be the wife and mother her family needed. The retreat center was a converted farmhouse 2 hours outside Fairfield Hollow, run by an organization affiliated with Paul's church. It was marketed as a place for spiritual renewal, but it functioned more like a re-education camp for women whose families deemed them rebellious or troubled. Claire was driven there the next morning. No phone, no internet access, no visitors except family members at the discretion of the director. She stayed there for 5 days. During that time, she met with counselors who focused on submission, obedience, and accepting God's plan for her life. She attended group sessions with other women, all there because they'd challenged their husband's authority or expressed unhappiness with their marriages. The message was consistent and overwhelming. Their feelings were wrong, their desires were selfish, and their only path to peace was complete surrender to male headship. On the 6th day, Aaron came to visit. He brought the children, who ran to Claire with tears and hugs. She held them, fighting back her own tears, trying to seem calm and happy so they wouldn't be scared. Aaron watched with satisfaction. He'd brought her a choice, he said. She could stay at the retreat center for the recommended 6 weeks and complete the program, or she could come home today if she agreed to certain conditions. She would end all contact with her family of origin, who had clearly been a negative influence. She would delete all social media accounts. She would attend marriage counseling with the church pastor. She would submit to Aaron's leadership in all household decisions. And she would never again mention leaving. Claire looked at her children clinging to her. She looked at Aaron's smug face. She realized that she was completely powerless in this moment. Anything she said, any resistance she showed, would be used as evidence that she needed to stay at the retreat center longer. Her children would grow up without her for weeks while strangers taught them that Mommy was sick, that Mommy had been bad. She agreed to Aaron's terms. She went home that afternoon. She smiled and acted grateful for his forgiveness. She attended the marriage counseling sessions where the pastor reinforced Aaron's authority. She cut contact with her mother and sister. She deleted her secret bank account. She tried to convince everyone, including herself, that she'd accepted her situation. But inside, she was planning. More carefully this time. More patiently. She would wait until Aaron truly believed she'd been broken, until his vigilance relaxed. Then she would run, and this time she wouldn't tell anyone. She wouldn't give them the chance to betray her again. 3 weeks after returning from the retreat center, Claire's sister Beth showed up at the house. She'd driven from her home without warning, worried because she hadn't heard from Claire and their mother was being evasive about what was happening. Aaron was at work. Claire let Beth inside, and for the first time in weeks, let herself be honest about how bad things were. Beth was horrified. She insisted they leave right then. She had room in her house. Claire and the children could stay with her. They'd figure out the legal stuff later. Claire hesitated. The children were at school. All her documents were still at her mother's house. She needed to plan this better. Beth pushed. They'd get the kids from school. They'd get the documents later. What mattered was getting Claire to safety now, before Aaron came home and the chance disappeared. Claire finally agreed. They drove to the school, signed the children out early citing a family emergency, and headed for Beth's car. That's when Paul's truck pulled into the school parking lot. Someone from the church, a volunteer in the school office, had called him when she saw Claire signing the children out, concerned that something was wrong. Paul had called Aaron, then rushed to intercept them. What happened next would later be reconstructed through witness statements, security footage, and forensic evidence, because none of the participants would tell a consistent story. Paul approached the car, asked Claire where she thought she was going. Beth, protective and angry, told him to back off, that Claire was leaving and it was none of his business. Paul said he couldn't let Claire take the children. It would be kidnapping, he said. Parental alienation. He'd already called Aaron and the police. The police part was a lie, but it had the desired effect. Claire froze, terrified of losing her children in a legal battle she couldn't afford to fight. Beth argued that Claire had every right to leave with her own children, that no law was being broken. The children, confused and frightened, started crying in the back seat. Aaron arrived minutes later, screeching into the parking lot. He got out of his car, his face red with rage barely controlled. He walked to Beth's car, opened the back door, and started unbuckling the children from their car seats. Beth tried to stop him. He shoved her hard enough that she fell against the car. Claire screamed at him to stop. Paul grabbed Claire's arms, holding her back. School security came out, tried to de-escalate the situation. Aaron, back in control of himself, explained calmly that his wife was having a mental health crisis and her sister was trying to take his children. He showed his ID, proved he was the father, acted like the reasonable party being victimized by unstable women. Security, not knowing what else to do and seeing no obvious signs of abuse, allowed Aaron to take the children. He loaded them into his car and drove away, leaving Claire sobbing in the parking lot. Paul released Claire. Beth helped her into the car. They sat there for several minutes, Claire too devastated to speak. Then Paul leaned into the car window. He said they needed to talk, all of them, including Miriam and Aaron. They needed to settle this properly, as a family. He suggested they meet at the church that evening, neutral ground, with the pastor present to mediate. Claire, defeated and desperate, agreed. The meeting was set for 7 in the evening at Fairfield Community Church. Beth didn't want Claire to go, sensed that it was another trap, but Claire insisted. She needed to see her children. She needed to make Aaron understand that she just wanted out, that he could have whatever custody arrangement he wanted. She just needed to leave. Beth said she'd go with her. Claire agreed. They arrived at the church to find Aaron, Paul, and Miriam waiting in the basement fellowship hall. The pastor wasn't there. Paul explained that he'd spoken with the pastor, who'd advised them to work it out as a family first, then involve him if needed. Another lie, but Claire didn't know that yet. The conversation started calmly enough. Aaron said he was hurt and confused by Claire's behavior. He'd been nothing but a good husband and provider. Why was she so determined to destroy their family? Claire tried to explain about feeling controlled, about losing herself, about needing independence. Aaron dismissed every point. That wasn't control, that was leadership. That wasn't losing herself, that was being part of a family unit. Her so-called needs were selfish desires that contradicted her marriage vows. Beth tried to advocate for Claire, to point out specific examples of Aaron's controlling behavior. Paul shut her down. This was a family matter, he said. Beth wasn't part of this family, and her input wasn't welcome. Beth argued back. The temperature in the room rose. Then Aaron dropped his ultimatum. Claire could come home tonight, and they'd move forward as if this incident never happened. Or she could leave, but if she did, he'd file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. He'd fight for full custody. He had documentation of her time at the retreat center, could frame it as psychiatric treatment for instability. He had witnesses from church who would testify to her rebellious behavior. He had financial resources to hire the best attorneys. Claire would lose her children. Claire felt the walls closing in. She looked at Aaron's cold, confident face and realized he'd already won. The system was rigged in his favor. The church supported him. His parents enabled him. Even her own mother had betrayed her. She had no money, no job, no witnesses to the private abuse that left no physical marks. If she left, she'd lose her children. If she stayed, she'd lose herself. She did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She bolted from the fellowship hall, up the basement stairs, out into the cool October night. She could hear them calling after her, Aaron's voice angry, Beth's voice concerned. She ran across the parking lot, down the side street, into the residential neighborhood that bordered the church. She didn't have a destination. She just needed to get away, to breathe, to think. Aaron, Paul, and Miriam followed in Aaron's car. They found her 3 blocks away, walking fast, crying. Aaron got out. Paul got out. They tried to talk to her, to get her to come back to the church so they could finish the conversation. Claire kept walking. Aaron grabbed her arm. She pulled away. Paul moved to block her path. What happened in the next few minutes would be disputed for months during the trial. The prosecution would argue it was premeditated, that the location was chosen specifically because the old well behind the abandoned church building provided an opportunity. The defense would claim it was a tragic accident, that emotions ran high and things got out of hand. But the outcome was undisputed. Claire Hollow ended up at the bottom of that well, and she didn't get there by herself. The well was on a piece of property behind the church, part of an old parcel that the congregation had purchased years ago with plans to expand that never materialized. It had been boarded over, deemed a safety hazard, but the boards had rotted over time and the church, in its bureaucratic inefficiency, hadn't gotten around to proper maintenance. The area was overgrown with brush and generally avoided. According to Aaron's initial statement to police, Claire had run toward the overgrown area despite their warnings. She'd been hysterical, not watching where she was going. She'd stepped on the rotted boards covering the well and fallen through before anyone could stop her. It was a terrible accident. They tried to get her out, but the well was deep and they couldn't reach her. By the time emergency services arrived, she was dead. But Beth, who had followed in her own car and witnessed the final confrontation, told a different story. She said she'd seen Aaron and Paul force Claire toward the overgrown area. She'd heard Claire screaming for help. She'd seen Paul hold Claire's arms while Aaron pushed her toward the well. She'd seen the boards break, but only after Aaron had positioned Claire directly over them. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. The physical evidence supported Beth's version. Claire's arms showed bruising consistent with being restrained. The pattern of the broken boards suggested weight applied deliberately, not someone accidentally stepping through. Fibers from Aaron's jacket were found on Claire's clothes, suggesting a struggle. Most damning was the security footage from the church's exterior camera, which showed Aaron, Paul, and Miriam standing near the well for several minutes after Claire fell, making no apparent attempt to call for help or rescue her. When emergency services finally arrived, 37 minutes after Claire fell, they found her at the bottom of the 40-foot well, neck broken, already dead. Aaron was sitting in his car in the church parking lot. Paul and Miriam were in the fellowship hall, cleaning up after the abandoned meeting. Beth was the one who had called 911, hysterical, screaming that they'd killed her sister. The investigation moved quickly. Detective Jennifer Lawson, brought in from the state police because of potential conflicts of interest in the small town, immediately suspected that the accident story was fabricated. The timeline didn't work. The injuries didn't match. The behavior of the family members was wrong. Aaron, Paul, and Miriam were all arrested within 48 hours. They each hired attorneys and stuck to their story. It was an accident. Claire had been unstable. She'd run from them. They tried to stop her from hurting herself. Her death was a tragedy, but it wasn't their fault. But the evidence told a different story. Investigators found text messages between Aaron and his father discussing the need to deal with Claire's rebellion permanently. They found records showing Aaron had consulted with a divorce attorney weeks earlier, asking about custody laws and what documentation he'd need to prove Claire was an unfit mother. They found statements from women who'd been at the retreat center with Claire, describing how she'd talked about being trapped, about fearing for her safety if she didn't comply with Aaron's demands. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution painted a picture of escalating control that culminated in murder when that control was threatened. The defense tried to portray Claire as mentally unstable, suggested that her own actions had led to her death, argued that at worst this was manslaughter, not murder. The jury saw through it. Aaron Hollow was convicted of first-degree murder. Paul Hollow was convicted of first-degree murder. Miriam Hollow was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and being an accessory after the fact. The sentences were severe. Aaron got life without parole. Paul got life with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Miriam got 25 years. The children, orphaned by their father's violence and their mother's death, went to live with Beth. She fought for custody against opposition from Aaron's extended family, who claimed she'd turned Claire against her husband and was responsible for the tragedy. The court sided with Beth, recognizing that the children needed to be far away from the toxic family dynamics that had killed their mother. Fairfield Hollow struggled to process what had happened. This wasn't supposed to happen in their town, to people they knew and respected. The church went through a reckoning, examining how their teachings about marriage and submission had been weaponized to trap and ultimately kill a woman. Some members left, unable to reconcile their faith with what had been done in its name. Others doubled down, insisting that the tragedy was an aberration, that true biblical marriage was still the ideal. Claire's death became a rallying point for domestic violence advocates, an example of how abuse doesn't always look like black eyes and broken bones. Sometimes it looks like control disguised as protection, isolation disguised as family unity, and murder disguised as intervention. Her story forced uncomfortable conversations about how communities enable abuse when they prioritize reputation over safety, when they treat women's autonomy as a threat to be managed rather than a right to be respected. The pattern we're seeing across these cases is undeniable. Violence doesn't announce itself with obvious warning signs that everyone recognizes. It builds slowly, hides behind normalcy, and by the time it's recognized for what it is, someone is already dead. Lena Mercer's parents thought they were dealing with typical teenage rebellion. Ethan Cole thought he was meeting an ex-girlfriend for coffee. Rhea Collins thought she was celebrating Christmas Eve. Claire Hollow thought she was finally escaping. They were all wrong, and that mistake cost them their lives. But there's another pattern we need to examine. The pattern of intimate partner violence, the specific dynamics of abuse that occur in romantic relationships. Because while Claire's story involved family-enabled abuse within a marriage, there are countless other stories where the violence exists solely between two people, where love transforms into possession, where a relationship becomes a cage that only one person can see the bars of. Maya Linford was 32, an accountant working for a mid-sized firm in Portland. She'd been married once in her 20s, divorced after 3 years when they both realized they wanted different things. Since then, she'd dated casually, focused on her career, enjoyed her independence. She had a close group of friends, a good relationship with her family, and a one-bedroom apartment she decorated exactly the way she wanted. She was content with her life. She met Owen Reed at a professional networking event. He was 35, charming, worked in commercial real estate. They talked about the Portland housing market, about their favorite restaurants, about hiking trails in the Columbia River Gorge. He asked for her number. She gave it to him, intrigued by his confidence and his easy humor. The first few months of dating were wonderful. Owen was attentive without being overbearing, interested in her work, supportive of her goals. He sent flowers to her office. He planned creative dates, from wine tasting in the Willamette Valley to a surprise weekend trip to the coast. Maya's friends liked him. Her parents liked him. She found herself falling for him faster than she'd expected. The shift started subtly, the way it often does. Owen began asking where she was going when she made plans with friends. Just curious, he said. He liked knowing what she was up to. Then he started suggesting that maybe she didn't need to go out so often, that they could spend the evening together instead. Maya didn't mind at first. She enjoyed spending time with him. But after a few months, she realized she'd stopped seeing her friends as regularly. It had happened gradually, each individual decision seeming reasonable, but the cumulative effect was isolation. When Maya mentioned moving in together after they'd been dating for a year, Owen was enthusiastic. He suggested she move into his house rather than finding a new place together. It was bigger, he said, better neighborhood, and he owned it, so they'd be saving money on rent. Maya agreed, though she felt a small flicker of unease about giving up her apartment, her space that was entirely hers. Living together accelerated the changes in Owen's behavior. He became critical of how Maya dressed, suggesting she looked too provocative when she wore anything fitted or showed too much skin. He didn't like her working late or going to after-work events, said it made him feel abandoned. He started checking her phone, at first openly, and then secretly, scrolling through her messages while she was in the shower or asleep. Maya tried to address it. She sat Owen down and explained that she needed some autonomy, some trust. His response was to flip the conversation. Why did she need so much autonomy? Was she hiding something? If she loved him, why did she need time away from him? Was she talking to other men? The arguments went in circles, Maya trying to assert basic boundaries and Owen reframing every boundary as a rejection of him. Things got worse. Owen started showing up at her office unannounced, claiming he wanted to take her to lunch, but really checking to make sure she was where she said she'd be. He installed a tracking app on her phone, telling her it was for safety so he'd know if she got in an accident. He went through her email, her social media messages, her search history. When Maya confronted him, he became angry, accusing her of being defensive because she had something to hide. The first time he physically hurt her, it was almost accidental. They were arguing about Maya's plan to have dinner with a male colleague from work. Owen was furious, calling her disrespectful, saying she was basically telling him she wanted to cheat. Maya tried to leave the room, to de-escalate by ending the conversation. Owen grabbed her arm to stop her, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises. She gasped in pain. He immediately let go, apologized, said he didn't mean to hurt her. He was just so upset, and she was walking away from him when they needed to talk. Maya accepted the apology, but felt shaken. She'd never been with someone who'd hurt her physically, even in anger. It felt like a line had been crossed. But Owen was so remorseful, so attentive in the following days, that she convinced herself it was a one-time thing, a mistake that wouldn't happen again. It happened again, and again. Each time, there was a trigger. Maya talking to another man. Maya being late coming home. Maya not answering her phone immediately. Owen's anger would flash hot and violent. A shove, a slap. Once a punch to her ribs that knocked the wind out of her. Then came the apologies, the promises to change, the explanations about stress at work or childhood trauma that made him react badly. Maya found herself making excuses for him, to her friends who noticed the bruises, to herself when she lay awake at night wondering how her life had become this. She tried to leave once. She packed a bag while Owen was at work, called her best friend Jenna, asked if she could stay with her for a while. Jenna said yes immediately, had been hoping Maya would leave, had been terrified watching her friend disappear into this relationship. But when Owen came home and found the bag, the explosion was worse than anything Maya had experienced before. He threw her against the wall, his hand around her throat, screaming that she was a liar, that she'd promised to love him, that she couldn't just abandon him. She couldn't breathe. Her vision started going dark. Then he let go, collapsed on the floor crying, begging her not to leave, saying he'd kill himself if she left. Maya unpacked her bag, not because she believed Owen's threats, though they frightened her, but because she was exhausted and scared and didn't know how to navigate leaving safely. Owen had access to all her finances since they'd combined accounts. He knew where her family lived, where her friends lived, where she worked. The idea of leaving felt impossible, like trying to escape from a locked room with no key. But she started planning. Quietly, she opened a new bank account Owen didn't know about. She started saving money again, small amounts that wouldn't be noticed. She researched domestic violence resources, learned about safety planning, talked to a counselor at a women's shelter about the best way to leave an abusive partner. She documented Owen's violence with photos of her injuries, recordings of his threatening voicemails, detailed notes of each incident. She was building a case, for herself if not for law enforcement. The counselor told her that leaving was the most dangerous time, that abusers often escalated when they sensed they were losing control. Maya understood this intellectually, but couldn't fully grasp it emotionally. She thought if she planned carefully enough, if she left while Owen was out of town for a work trip, she could disappear before he realized what was happening. She was wrong. Owen found her new bank account statement. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. He'd gone through the mail before she could check it, found the statement from a bank they didn't use together, opened it. He confronted her that evening, the statement in his hand, his face twisted with rage. What the fuck is this? Maya's heart stopped. She'd been so close. Owen was supposed to leave for San Francisco in 2 days for a week-long business trip. She'd planned to leave while he was gone. Now that plan was destroyed. It's just a savings account, she said, trying to sound calm. For emergencies. Emergencies or for leaving me? Owen stepped closer. You're planning to leave. After everything I've done for you. After I've given you everything. Owen, please. You're scaring me. I'm scaring you. His laugh was bitter. You're the one sneaking around, hiding money, planning to abandon me, and I'm scaring you? Maya tried to move toward the door. Owen blocked her path. The argument escalated, his anger building, his voice getting louder. He grabbed her shoulders, shook her, demanded to know where she thought she was going. Maya fought back for the first time, pushing him away, screaming at him to leave her alone. He hit her hard across the face, splitting her lip. Blood filled Maya's mouth. Something inside her broke and reassembled into clarity. This wasn't going to stop. It was only going to get worse. She had to leave right now, tonight, or she might not get another chance. She ran for the bedroom, grabbed her emergency bag she'd hidden in the back of the closet, ran for the front door. Owen caught her in the hallway. They struggled. He was stronger, but Maya was desperate. She managed to break free, get the door open, run into the hallway of their apartment building. Owen followed, still shouting. A neighbor opened their door, asked if everything was okay. Maya screamed for them to call the police. Owen, suddenly aware they had an audience, changed tactics. He became calm, apologetic, explained that they were just having a disagreement, that Maya was overreacting. But Maya's split lip was bleeding, and the neighbor had already called 911. Police arrived within minutes. They separated Maya and Owen, took statements. Maya told them everything, showed them the photos on her phone of previous injuries, gave them the recordings of Owen's threats. Owen denied everything, claimed Maya was having a mental health crisis, that she'd hurt herself to make him look bad. The officers looked at Maya's injuries, at Owen's calm demeanor, at the documented history of abuse. They arrested Owen for domestic assault. Maya was taken to the hospital to have her injuries documented, then connected with a victim advocate who helped her get to a shelter. The legal process began. Maya filed for a restraining order, which was granted. She filed a police report detailing the years of abuse. She moved forward with pressing charges. Owen's attorney painted her as vindictive, as a woman scorned who was fabricating abuse allegations to punish him for the relationship failing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the recordings, the medical records, the testimony of friends who'd witnessed Maya's deterioration over the years. Owen Reed was convicted of domestic assault and sentenced to 3 years in prison. The sentence seemed short to Maya, given years of abuse, but it was more than many victims got. She threw herself into rebuilding her life. She moved to a different city, changed jobs, re-established connections with the friends and family she'd been isolated from. She went to therapy, worked through the trauma, learned to recognize the warning signs she'd missed with Owen. Maya's story, while harrowing, had a relatively fortunate ending. She survived. She escaped. Many don't. The statistics are grim. An average of 3 women per day are killed by intimate partners in the United States. Leaving is the most dangerous time, when an abuser's sense of control is most threatened, when violence often escalates from abuse to murder. But intimate partner violence isn't always what we expect it to look like. There's a narrative in popular culture that domestic violence is always a male abuser and a female victim. While that's the most common dynamic, it's not the only one. Men can be victims too, though they face additional barriers in seeking help, societal expectations that tell them real men don't get abused, that they should be strong enough to stop it, that admitting victimization is admitting weakness. Daniel Cross was 43, a high school English teacher in a small Colorado town. He'd been married to Eva for 12 years. They had no children, a choice that had been mutual at the start of their marriage, but that Eva came to resent as she got older and watched her friends become parents. The resentment manifested in criticism of Daniel. He wasn't ambitious enough. He didn't make enough money. He was content being a teacher when he could have pursued a more lucrative career. The criticism became constant, eroding Daniel's self-esteem year by year. Eva mocked his appearance, his interests, his family. She told him he was lucky she stayed with him, that no one else would want someone so mediocre. When Daniel tried to defend himself or push back, Eva's response was rage. She'd throw things, scream. Once she punched him in the face hard enough to give him a black eye. Daniel told no one. When colleagues asked about the black eye, he said he'd walked into a door. When his brother noticed, he seemed withdrawn and unhappy. Daniel said he was just stressed about work. The idea of admitting that his wife abused him felt impossible. Men weren't supposed to be victims. Men were supposed to protect themselves. Admitting abuse felt like admitting failure. The abuse escalated over time. Eva destroyed Daniel's belongings when she was angry, threw away books he cherished, deleted files on his computer. She controlled all their finances, giving Daniel a small allowance and monitoring every purchase. She isolated him from his family and friends, creating dramatic scenes whenever he tried to make plans outside the house. She threatened to tell everyone he abused her if he ever tried to leave, said she'd ruin his career and his reputation. Daniel felt trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He'd considered leaving, but didn't know how. Where would he go? How would he prove the abuse when there were no witnesses, no one who would believe that a woman could victimize a man who was larger and stronger than her? The few times he'd tried to restrain Eva when she was hitting him, she'd threatened to call the police and say he'd attacked her. He believed she'd do it. She was manipulative enough, convincing enough. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Daniel had accepted an invitation to his brother's birthday party without checking with Eva first. When he told her about it, she exploded. She screamed that he was selfish, that he clearly didn't care about her feelings, that she should have divorced him years ago. Daniel, exhausted from years of walking on eggshells, said maybe divorce was a good idea. Maybe they'd both be happier apart. Eva's response was to attack him physically. She came at him with her fists, hitting him in the chest, the face, the arms. Daniel backed away, trying to create distance without fighting back. Eva grabbed a lamp from the side table and swung it at his head. He raised his arm to block it, felt the impact, heard the lamp shatter. A piece of broken ceramic sliced across Eva's arm, drawing blood. She stared at the blood, at Daniel standing there with his arms raised defensively, and her expression changed. She started screaming that he'd attacked her, that he'd hurt her, that she was calling the police. Daniel tried to explain what had really happened, that she'd attacked him with the lamp, but Eva was already on the phone, crying, telling the 911 dispatcher that her husband had assaulted her with a lamp and she was bleeding. When police arrived, they saw Eva with a bleeding arm and Daniel standing uninjured except for some redness on his face. Eva gave a tearful statement about how Daniel had become violent when she told him she wanted to have a serious conversation about their marriage. She showed them the broken lamp. The cut on her arm played the role of frightened victim perfectly. Daniel tried to tell his side of the story, but he could see the officers didn't believe him. He was a large man. Eva was a small woman. The physical evidence showed she was injured. It didn't matter that he had defensive wounds, that the lamp had been thrown by her. He was arrested for domestic assault. The charges were eventually dropped when a neighbor came forward with video footage from a security camera that showed Eva attacking Daniel through the window. The footage clearly showed Daniel trying to retreat, Eva pursuing him with the lamp. It vindicated Daniel legally, but the damage was done. Colleagues had heard about the arrest. Students' parents had raised concerns about having a domestic abuser teaching their children. Even after the charges were dropped and the truth came out, the suspicion remained. Daniel divorced Eva and moved to another state, needing to start fresh somewhere people didn't know the story. He found another teaching position, rebuilt his life, but the experience left deep scars. He still flinched at loud noises. He still felt anxiety in relationships. He still struggled with the shame of having been a victim and the anger at a system that hadn't initially believed him. Both Maya's and Daniel's stories illustrate the complexities of intimate partner violence. It's not always obvious from the outside. Victims stay for complicated reasons including fear, financial dependence, emotional manipulation, and lack of support. Leaving requires resources and planning and courage that not everyone has access to. And even when victims do leave, they often face disbelief, judgment, and a legal system that doesn't always protect them effectively. These patterns of control, isolation, and violence exist across all demographics, all socioeconomic levels, all types of relationships. They're enabled by societal attitudes that minimize abuse, by systems that fail to take warning signs seriously, by the very human tendency to not want to believe that people we know and trust are capable of such cruelty. And sometimes, those systems fail so spectacularly that preventable tragedies become inevitable. Sometimes the warning signs aren't just present but documented, reported, and ignored. Sometimes violence isn't a surprise but a predicted outcome that no one acted to prevent. Layla Noor was 29, an engineer working for a tech company in Seattle. She'd immigrated from Pakistan with her family when she was 10, built a successful career, was active in her community. She'd been casually dating Ryan Cade for about 3 months when things started to feel wrong. Ryan was intense in ways that seemed romantic at first, but quickly became concerning. He wanted to know where she was at all times. He got jealous when she talked to male co-workers. He pushed for commitment faster than Layla was comfortable with. When Layla tried to slow things down, Ryan became angry. He showed up at her apartment unannounced. He sent dozens of texts if she didn't respond immediately. He accused her of seeing other men. Layla recognized the red flags and ended the relationship clearly and directly. Ryan didn't take it well. He started stalking her, following her to work, waiting outside her apartment building, sending increasingly threatening messages. Layla did everything right. She documented every incident. She saved every threatening text and email. She went to the police and filed a report. She requested a restraining order. And here's where the system failed catastrophically. Ryan Cade had a criminal history. He'd been convicted of assault against a previous girlfriend. He'd violated a previous restraining order. He was on parole. All of this information was in the system, easily accessible. The judge who reviewed Layla's restraining order request granted it, but set a hearing date 3 weeks out for Ryan to contest it. In the meantime, Layla was given a temporary order of protection. She was told that if Ryan violated it, she should call police immediately. She was given pamphlets about domestic violence resources. She was sent home to wait. Ryan's parole officer was notified of the restraining order. She made a note in his file, but didn't call him in for a meeting or increased supervision. The system logged the information and moved on, treating it as a bureaucratic formality rather than a warning that Ryan was escalating. Layla called the police 4 times in 2 weeks reporting that Ryan was violating the restraining order. He'd been seen near her apartment building. He'd followed her car. He'd sent emails to her work address, even though the order specified no contact. Each time, police filed a report but didn't arrest him. They said they needed to catch him in the act, that reports after the fact weren't enough for an arrest. They told Layla to keep documenting, to stay vigilant, to call if she felt in immediate danger. On a Tuesday evening in March, Layla left work at her usual time. She walked to the parking garage where she kept her car. Security footage would later show Ryan Cade waiting in the garage, having bypassed the security gate by following another car in. He approached Layla as she reached her car. They argued. Layla tried to get into her car and lock the doors. Ryan broke the driver's side window with a tire iron he'd brought with him. He dragged Layla out of the car and beat her to death in that parking garage, in view of security cameras, in a building with security guards who didn't respond until it was too late. Ryan Cade fled the scene in Layla's car, which he abandoned a few miles away. He was arrested at his apartment 3 hours later, covered in Layla's blood. He confessed immediately, showing no remorse. She'd disrespected him, he said. She'd embarrassed him by rejecting him. She'd made him feel powerless. He'd just wanted to talk to her, to make her understand, but she wouldn't listen. So he'd made her listen. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, the confession clear. Ryan Cade was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the conviction did nothing to address the systemic failures that had cost Layla her life. The subsequent investigation revealed a cascade of failures. Ryan's parole officer had 15 other cases and couldn't provide intensive supervision to anyone. The police department had a policy of not arresting for restraining order violations unless they witnessed them directly, a policy that essentially made such orders unenforceable. The court system had a 3-week backlog for restraining order hearings, leaving victims vulnerable while they waited. Every point of failure was documented, explained, attributed to budget constraints or staffing shortages or policy limitations. Layla's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city, the parole board, and the police department. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The city agreed to policy changes, including mandatory arrest for documented restraining order violations and increased funding for domestic violence units. Layla's death became a case study in how not to handle stalking and domestic violence, how not to manage parolees with histories of violence, how not to protect vulnerable people who do everything right and still end up dead because the system fails them. If that case makes you angry, if you're sitting there wondering how many more failures have to happen before real change occurs, leave a comment below. Tell me what you think needs to change. These aren't just stories. They're indictments of systems that continue to fail vulnerable people. And your voice, your engagement, helps keep these conversations going. But systemic failure isn't just about domestic violence and stalking. It extends to how we verify credentials, how we trust professional certifications, how we assume that impressive resumes and confident presentations mean someone is who they claim to be. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who have mastered the art of deception, who have built entire lives on lies, and who will kill to keep those lies from being exposed. Thomas More was a successful financial advisor in Austin, Texas. At least, that's what everyone believed. He had a beautiful office in a downtown high-rise, drove a Mercedes, lived in an expensive condo. He gave presentations at investment seminars, wrote articles about wealth management, projected an image of expertise and success. His wife, Rachel, was proud of what he'd accomplished. They'd been married for 8 years, had 2 young children, and seemed to have the kind of comfortable upper-middle-class life that many people aspired to. But Thomas More's success was entirely fabricated. The credentials he claimed, a degree from Wharton Business School, certification as a financial planner, previous employment at prestigious firms, none of it was real. He'd created false documents, paid for fake diplomas, built a resume out of whole cloth. His actual background was far less impressive. He dropped out of community college, worked a series of low-level sales jobs, and eventually decided that pretending to be successful was easier than actually becoming successful. His business operated on the edge of legality, making just enough legitimate investments to avoid immediate suspicion while skimming money from clients' accounts to fund his lifestyle. He convinced elderly clients to invest in high-risk schemes that benefited him more than them. He fabricated financial statements to hide losses. He was, essentially, running a sophisticated con that could only continue as long as no one looked too closely at his background or his books. Rachel had no idea. Thomas kept his professional life separate from his home life. She didn't involve herself in his business, trusted that he knew what he was doing. When they'd met, he'd already established his fake credentials. She'd never had reason to question them. The problem started when a former client, suspicious about investment returns that didn't match market conditions, hired a private investigator to look into Thomas's background. The investigator discovered the fabrications quickly. No record of Thomas attending Wharton. No certification from any legitimate financial planning organization. Previous employers listed on his resume denied ever employing him. The private investigator took the findings to the Texas State Securities Board. They launched a formal investigation. Thomas was informed that he was under investigation and would need to provide documentation of his credentials and account for discrepancies in his clients' portfolios. He knew immediately that he was finished. Once they started looking, they'd uncover everything. His career, his reputation, his freedom, all of it would disappear. He had 2 options. He could come clean, face the legal consequences, hope for leniency in exchange for cooperation. Or he could eliminate the biggest complication in his life, the person whose standard of living would drop dramatically if he went to prison, the person who might testify against him if investigators started asking questions about what she knew and when she knew it. Thomas chose option 2. He decided to kill Rachel. He planned it methodically. He researched methods, considered and rejected various scenarios. Too much violence would be suspicious. It needed to look like an accident or a random crime. He settled on staging a home invasion. He'd wait until the children were at his parents' house for the weekend, claim he'd been out late at a work event, come home to find Rachel murdered by an intruder. It was cliché, but clichés existed because they worked. On a Saturday night in June, Thomas took the children to his parents' house for a planned sleepover. He came home, argued with Rachel about finances. She'd been asking questions lately, worried about credit card bills that seemed high even with his supposed income. He'd been deflecting, but she was persistent. The argument escalated. Thomas saw an opportunity. Instead of staging an elaborate scene later, he could do it now, in the heat of the moment, make it look impulsive. He attacked Rachel with a kitchen knife, stabbing her repeatedly in a frenzied assault that was partly genuine rage at being caught in his lies and partly performance for what he knew would be a crime scene investigation. He called 911, hysterical, screaming that someone had broken in and killed his wife. He gave a description of a masked intruder fleeing the scene. He played the role of devastated husband perfectly, but the investigators saw through it immediately. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was taken from the house. The attack was too personal, too vicious for a random home invasion. And Thomas's alibi didn't check out. He claimed he'd been at a business dinner, but the restaurant had no record of his reservation. He said he'd stopped for gas on the way home, but surveillance footage from the gas station didn't show his car. The financial investigation continued in parallel with the murder investigation. When detectives learned that Thomas was about to be exposed as a fraud, that Rachel might have been questioning him about financial issues, motive became clear. Thomas had killed Rachel to eliminate a witness and to collect her life insurance policy, which would help fund his legal defense or his escape if he decided to run. The evidence against him was circumstantial but compelling. The lack of evidence for an intruder, the financial motive, the inconsistencies in his statements, the forensic evidence showing that the struggle had occurred differently than Thomas described. Most damning was the discovery of Thomas's internet search history, which showed he'd been researching how to stage a home invasion and how much life insurance would pay out in the event of a spouse's murder. Thomas Moore was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. His defense attorney tried to argue reasonable doubt, to suggest that the investigators had fixated on Thomas too quickly and ignored other possibilities. But the prosecution built a comprehensive case showing how Thomas's entire life was a lie and how Rachel's murder was just another piece of that pattern of deception. The jury convicted him after 6 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced him to life without parole, calling him a narcissist who had valued his fraudulent image more than his wife's life. The children went to live with Rachel's sister. Thomas's parents, who had believed in their son's success and had no idea about the lies, were left to grapple with the reality that their son was both a fraud and a murderer. The case prompted the Texas State Securities Board to implement stricter verification procedures for financial advisors. Professional licensing boards across multiple industries began requiring more rigorous background checks. Rachel's family established a foundation to help victims of financial fraud, but none of it brought Rachel back or gave her children their mother. Thomas More's story connects to a broader theme about how easy it is to lie in our society, how much we take credentials and professional presentations at face value, how rarely we verify the claims people make about themselves. He'd operated for years before anyone questioned him, had built a life and a business on fabrications that collapsed the moment someone looked closely. And when that collapse became inevitable, he chose murder over accountability. These cases, each one unique in its details but connected in their patterns, illustrate a fundamental truth about violence in our society. It doesn't always announce itself obviously. It hides behind familiarity and trust and normalcy. It escalates in environments where warning signs are ignored or systems fail to intervene. It's committed by people who believe they have a right to control others, to eliminate problems, to prioritize their own needs and desires over human life. But there are cases that take this pattern even further, cases where violence occurs in spaces we think of as particularly safe, where the randomness of victim selection makes the crime even more disturbing. Cases where someone dies not because of who they were or what they knew, but simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The Hotel Seabreeze in Playa Verde was a popular mid-range resort that catered to tourists looking for affordable beach vacations. It was clean, well-maintained, located right on the coast with easy access to restaurants and nightlife. Room 412 had an ocean view and had been recently renovated. It had hosted hundreds of guests over the years without incident. Dr. Ana Beltran checked into that room on a Thursday afternoon in August. She was 47, a physician from Mexico City attending a medical conference in Playa Verde. She presented a paper that morning on innovations in emergency medicine and was scheduled to give another presentation the following day. She'd come alone, planning to enjoy some beach time between conference sessions. Her body was discovered by housekeeping the next morning when she failed to check out at the scheduled time and didn't respond to phone calls. The scene was brutal. Dr. Beltran had been beaten and strangled in her hotel room. The violence was extreme, personal, suggesting rage rather than a simple robbery. Her laptop and some jewelry were missing, but cash in her purse had been left behind. The room showed signs of a struggle, furniture knocked over, bedding torn, indicating Dr. Beltran had fought her attacker. The investigation faced immediate challenges. Hotel security cameras in the hallway outside Dr. Beltran's room had malfunctioned the night before, a technical glitch that the hotel claimed was coincidental, but that investigators found suspicious. Other cameras showed various people in the hallways and common areas. But without footage of who entered Dr. Beltran's room, identifying suspects was difficult. Investigators interviewed other hotel guests. Several reported hearing loud noises from the fourth floor around 11 at night, what sounded like furniture being moved or something heavy falling. No one had called the front desk or investigated. People in hotels were accustomed to ignoring sounds from other rooms, assuming it was none of their business. The forensic evidence told a partial story. DNA under Dr. Beltran's fingernails indicated she'd scratched her attacker. Fingerprints in the room belonged to multiple people, expected in a hotel room that had hosted numerous guests, but several unidentified prints couldn't be matched to hotel staff or known guests. The pattern of injuries suggested at least 2 attackers, possibly more, working together to subdue a victim who fought back fiercely. The missing laptop became a focus of the investigation. Dr. Beltran's colleagues said she'd had it with her at the conference, had used it for her presentation. It contained research data, patient information, personal files. If the motive was robbery, why take the laptop but leave the cash? If the motive was something else, what? Investigators expanded their search to include everyone who'd had access to the hotel that night. Guests, staff, contractors, delivery people. They collected DNA samples from hotel employees, compared them to the evidence from the crime scene. One of the maintenance workers refused to provide a sample and stopped coming to work. Police located him at his apartment, found Dr. Beltran's laptop in his possession. He was arrested immediately. During questioning, the maintenance worker, Miguel Santos, claimed he'd found the laptop in a dumpster behind the hotel. He thought it was discarded, so he took it. He had nothing to do with the murder, but his DNA matched the evidence under Dr. Beltran's fingernails. Confronted with this, he changed his story. He'd seen Dr. Beltran's room door open, went to investigate, found her already dead, panicked, and took the laptop because it was valuable. He didn't kill her, he said. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Investigators didn't believe him. The evidence suggested he'd been in a physical struggle with Dr. Beltran. The forensics indicated multiple attackers. Someone else had been involved. They pressured Santos to identify his accomplice. He maintained he'd acted alone, just taking the laptop after finding her dead. But his story had too many holes, too many inconsistencies. The case stalled. Santos was charged with murder based on the DNA evidence, but without his confession or testimony about accomplices, the full story remained unclear. His defense attorney argued that the DNA evidence only proved Santos had been in contact with Dr. Beltran at some point, not that he'd killed her. Maybe she'd scratched him earlier in a different context, maybe at the hotel bar or in passing in a hallway. The prosecution countered that the specific location of the DNA, under her fingernails with skin cells indicating she'd clawed someone violently, proved it was from the attack. The trial was complicated by the lack of complete evidence. The malfunctioning cameras meant no visual proof of who entered Dr. Beltran's room. The multiple unidentified fingerprints suggested other people had been involved, but without identifying them, the prosecution couldn't prove a conspiracy. Santos maintained his innocence, claiming he was being railroaded for a crime he didn't commit. The jury struggled with the incomplete picture. Some believed Santos was guilty, that the DNA evidence was too strong to ignore. Others had reasonable doubt, concerned about the missing accomplices and the possibility that Santos was telling the truth about finding Dr. Beltran already dead. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on a lesser charge of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, unable to prove premeditation, but convinced Santos was involved in Dr. Beltran's death. Santos was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Dr. Beltran's family was devastated by the verdict, feeling that justice hadn't been fully served. They believed there were others involved who'd escaped prosecution, that the full truth about why Dr. Beltran had been killed and by whom remained hidden. The hotel installed new security systems, upgraded their cameras, increased security patrols. But the damage to their reputation was significant. Room 412 was renovated again, renumbered, but guests who knew the story requested different rooms. The Hotel Seabreeze became known as the place where that doctor was murdered, and despite management's efforts to move past it, the association persisted. Dr. Beltran's case highlighted the vulnerabilities of traveling alone, the false sense of security hotels provide, and the reality that violence can find anyone anywhere. She'd done nothing wrong, had no connection to her killers beyond being in a place they had access to. Her death was random in the worst way, a convergence of circumstances that cost her life and left her family with more questions than answers. The incomplete resolution of her case reflects a harsh reality about criminal justice. Not every case gets solved. Not every question gets answered. Sometimes evidence is insufficient. Sometimes witnesses don't come forward. Sometimes the guilty escape justice and victims' families are left with grief and uncertainty. These stories, from Lena Mercer in Redwood Valley to Dr. Ana Beltran in Playa Verde, paint a comprehensive picture of how violence manifests in our society. It comes from teenagers who see murder as preferable to consequence. It comes from educated professionals who weaponize their expertise. It comes from gang members with illegal weapons and no regard for bystanders. It comes from families who disguise control as love and murder as intervention. It comes from intimate partners who believe possession justifies violence. It comes from systems that fail to protect despite documented warnings. It comes from frauds whose lies grow teeth. It comes from unknown attackers in spaces we thought were safe. The common threads are clear. Trust as a vulnerability. Familiarity as camouflage. Authority as a shield. Systems that document risk but fail to act. People who value control over human life. The gradual escalation that goes unnoticed until it's too late. The warning signs that are visible in retrospect but ignored in real time. These aren't anomalies. These aren't rare exceptions. These patterns repeat constantly across jurisdictions, across demographics, across all the artificial boundaries we create to make ourselves feel safe. Every day, someone is killed by a family member. Every day, someone dies at the hands of an intimate partner. Every day, someone becomes collateral damage and violence that had nothing to do with them. Every day, systems fail and preventable tragedies become inevitable. Understanding these patterns doesn't guarantee safety. Recognizing warning signs doesn't eliminate risk, but it does something important. It challenges our comfortable assumptions. It forces us to acknowledge that danger doesn't always announce itself with obvious red flags. It reminds us that the most violent crimes often come from the most trusted sources. Think about the Mercer case. A seemingly normal family in a quiet town. Parents concerned about their daughter's behavior, making decisions they thought were in her best interest. They never imagined that their attempt to impose consequences would cost them their lives. The warning signs were there: subtle changes in Lena's behavior, increased resentment, withdrawal, but nothing that screamed imminent violence. How many families right now are navigating similar dynamics, unaware of how close they are to tragedy? Consider Natalie Voss, brilliant and accomplished, using her expertise not to save lives, but to take one. The intelligence that made her successful in her field became the tool of murder. She calculated dosages with the same precision she used in her research. She staged the scene with methodical care. Her profession gave her access and knowledge that made her dangerous in ways a typical person couldn't be. And she almost got away with it. Would have if not for one thorough medical examiner who refused to accept the obvious explanation. Think about Rhea Collins, celebrating Christmas Eve with friends, doing everything right, threatening no one, and dying anyway because Marcus Hale brought a gun to a fight and fired it without thinking about where the bullets would go. The system knew about Hale, documented his violence, released him anyway, failed to supervise him adequately, ignored violations that should have sent him back to custody. Every failure in that chain of decision-making contributed to Rhea's death. She deserved better. She deserved a system that took threats seriously. Consider Claire Hollow, trapped in a marriage that disguised control as godly leadership, abuse as discipline, isolation as family unity. She tried to leave. She planned carefully. She reached out for help. And the very people who should have protected her, her family, her community, her church, became the instruments of her murder. They believed they were saving her soul while they were ending her life. The children who lost their mother will grow up knowing that the people who were supposed to love her killed her instead. Think about Maya Linford and Daniel Cross, both victims of intimate partner violence, both trapped by dynamics that seemed impossible to escape, both facing systems that didn't fully understand or adequately address the complexities of their situations. Maya survived. Daniel escaped. But how many others are still trapped right now in relationships where love has become a cage, where isolation masquerades as devotion, where violence is explained away as passion or stress or anything other than what it is, which is abuse? Consider Layla Noor, who did everything the system told her to do. Documented the stalking, filed reports, got a restraining order, called when it was violated, and died anyway because the system couldn't or wouldn't act with the urgency her situation required. The pieces of paper meant to protect her were worthless without enforcement. The warnings she provided fell on bureaucratic ears too overwhelmed or too indifferent to treat her case as the emergency it was. She died in a parking garage while a system that had promised to protect her moved at its usual glacial pace. Think about Rachel Moore, married to a man whose entire life was a lie, who never imagined that his fraudulent credentials would lead to her murder. Thomas More valued his fake image more than his wife's life. When exposure became inevitable, he chose violence over accountability. Rachel died not because of anything she did, but because she was inconvenient, a potential witness, a complication in Thomas's desperate attempt to avoid consequences. And consider Dr. Anna Beltran, attending a conference, staying in a hotel, doing nothing unusual or risky, and dying in a brutal attack that may never be fully explained or prosecuted. The incomplete justice in her case, the unanswered questions, the possibility that accomplices escaped punishment, all of it compounds the tragedy. Her family doesn't just grieve her loss. They grieve the lack of closure, the uncertainty, the knowledge that someone out there participated in killing her and may never face consequences. These stories span different types of violence, different relationships between victims and perpetrators, different failures in systems and society. But they share fundamental similarities. They all involve violence that was hidden, enabled, or ignored until it was too late. They all involve victims who deserved better than what they got. They all involve perpetrators who believed, for various reasons, that they had a right to take human life. And they all involve systems, whether family structures or professional organizations or criminal justice institutions, that failed to prevent tragedies they should have seen coming. The question isn't whether violence exists. Obviously it does. The question is how we as a society respond to it. Do we take warning signs seriously? Do we believe victims when they report abuse? Do we adequately fund the systems meant to protect vulnerable people? Do we hold perpetrators accountable in ways that actually deter future violence? Do we challenge the cultural narratives that enable abuse, the ideas that men should control their partners, that family unity matters more than individual safety, that professional success exempts someone from scrutiny, that image matters more than truth? These are uncomfortable questions because honest answers require acknowledging our collective failures. It's easier to treat each case as an isolated tragedy, an unpredictable anomaly, than to recognize the patterns that make violence predictable and often preventable. It's easier to focus on stranger danger and teach children not to talk to unfamiliar adults than to acknowledge that most violence comes from people children already know. It's easier to believe in the myth of safe spaces than to accept that danger can exist anywhere, in homes and churches and hotels and hospitals. But discomfort is necessary for change. Recognizing patterns is the first step toward disrupting them. Understanding how violence hides allows us to become better at recognizing it. Acknowledging systemic failures creates pressure for systemic reform. Telling these stories, as difficult as they are to hear, keeps the victim's experiences from being forgotten and forces us to confront the reality of violence in our society. The cases we've explored today aren't entertainment, though they may be presented in formats designed to engage and inform. They're real tragedies that destroyed real families. Lena Mercer's aunt will never forget finding her sister and brother-in-law murdered. Ethan Cole's girlfriend will never stop wondering if there were signs she missed. Rhea Collins's parents will never get to see their daughter fulfill her potential as a nurse. Claire Hollow's children will grow up without their mother because adults failed to protect her. Maya Linford carries scars, physical and psychological, from years of abuse. Daniel Cross rebuilt his life, but lost years to a relationship that diminished him. Layla Noor's family lives with the knowledge that her death was preventable. Rachel Moore's children lost their mother because their father valued lies over her life. Dr. Anna Beltran's family may never know the full truth about why she died or who was responsible. These aren't abstract concepts. These are human costs. And every similar case that happens tomorrow and the day after represents another family shattered, another life ended, another failure of individuals and systems to do better. So what do we do with this information? First, we believe victims. When someone tells you they're afraid of a partner or family member, when they describe controlling behavior or escalating threats, believe them. Don't minimize. Don't suggest they're overreacting. Don't prioritize maintaining family harmony or social appearances over someone's safety. Believe them and help them access resources. Second, we recognize warning signs. Isolation from friends and family. Controlling behavior disguised as care. Escalating jealousy or possessiveness. Sudden personality changes. Threats, even ones framed as jokes. Obsessive monitoring of phones or social media. Financial control. Destruction of property. Any violence. Even pushing or grabbing, not just hitting. These aren't normal relationship dynamics. These are red flags that indicate someone is in danger. Third, we support adequate funding for systems meant to protect vulnerable people. Domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, victim advocates, parole supervision, mental health services, law enforcement training, court resources to process restraining orders quickly. These services save lives, but only if they're properly funded and staffed. Cutting budgets for these programs has direct consequences measured in human lives. Fourth, we hold perpetrators accountable, not just through criminal prosecution, though that's important, but through social consequences. When someone is credibly accused of abuse, we don't give them the benefit of the doubt at the victim's expense. We don't separate the art from the artist or the work from the worker when the person has demonstrated violence. We create social costs for abusive behavior that make it less tolerable and less likely to be hidden or excused. Fifth, we examine and challenge the cultural narratives that enable violence. The idea that men should be dominant in relationships. The belief that family privacy matters more than individual safety. The assumption that professionals or community leaders are above suspicion. The notion that victims are somehow responsible for the violence committed against them. These narratives need to be actively dismantled and replaced with healthier frameworks for understanding relationships, power, and accountability. None of this is easy. Recognizing that danger can come from trusted sources is frightening. Believing victims sometimes means accepting that people we like or respect have done terrible things. Supporting adequate funding requires political will and resource allocation. Holding perpetrators accountable can feel harsh when the perpetrator is someone we know. Challenging cultural narratives means questioning beliefs we may have internalized without examination. But the alternative, continuing with the status quo that allows these tragedies to repeat endlessly, is unacceptable. Every Lena Mercer who decides murder is preferable to consequence represents a failure to teach healthy coping mechanisms and provide appropriate mental health support. Every Natalie Voss who weaponizes professional expertise represents a failure to maintain adequate oversight and accountability in professions with access to dangerous tools. Every Marcus Hale who is released despite clear indications of danger represents a failure of the criminal justice system to prioritize public safety. Every Claire Hollow who dies seeking freedom from abuse represents a failure of communities to protect vulnerable members. Every Maya Linford who survives years of abuse before escaping, and every Daniel Cross who endures violence in silence, represents a failure to create environments where victims feel safe coming forward. Every Layla Noor who documents threats and still dies represents a failure of protection systems to act with appropriate urgency. Every Thomas More who builds a life on lies and resorts to murder when exposed represents a failure to verify credentials and hold frauds accountable. Every Dr. Anna Beltran who dies in an incomplete investigation represents a failure of justice systems to fully resolve cases and provide closure to families. These failures are collective. They implicate all of us, and addressing them requires collective action. It requires individuals being willing to intervene when they see concerning behavior. It requires communities prioritizing safety over reputation. It requires systems being adequately resourced and effectively managed. It requires cultural change that shifts attitudes about violence, power, and accountability. The stories we've explored today are heavy. They're meant to be. They should sit with you uncomfortably. They should make you think about the people in your life, the warning signs you might have missed or minimized, the systems you participate in, and whether they're adequate to their stated purposes. They should generate anger at preventable deaths and systemic failures. They should generate empathy for victims who deserve better. And hopefully, they should generate commitment to do better, individually and collectively. Because the next time you hear about a domestic violence homicide, or a victim killed by someone on parole, or an abuse victim trapped in a controlling relationship, or a professional who weaponized their expertise, or a random attack in a supposedly safe space, you'll recognize the patterns. You'll understand the systemic contexts. You'll be less likely to write it off as an isolated tragedy and more likely to see it as part of a broader problem that requires sustained attention and action. The most dangerous place isn't always the street. Sometimes it's the place you feel safest. Sometimes it's your home. Sometimes it's your relationship. Sometimes it's with people who claim to love you or protect you or guide you. Sometimes it's in spaces designed to be secure. The danger is real. The violence is hidden in plain sight. And until we as a society get better at recognizing, interrupting, and preventing it, stories like these will continue to repeat. If this deep dive into cases that reveal the hidden nature of violence has impacted you, if you've learned something or had your perspective challenged, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Share this video with others who need to hear these stories. Leave a comment about which case affected you most or what changes you think need to happen. These conversations matter. Your engagement helps this content reach more people. And the more people understand these patterns, the better chance we have of disrupting them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to these difficult stories. Thank you for caring enough about these victims to learn from their tragedies. Stay safe. Stay aware. And remember that the people closest to us sometimes pose the greatest danger, not because closeness is inherently dangerous, but because it provides cover for those who would abuse trust and exploit vulnerability. Recognizing that reality is the first step toward changing it.